I'm Professor Pat Murphy, and I'd like to welcome you to the third Berges lecture for 2016. Our speaker tonight is Kenneth Ricci, who's a 35-year aviation industry veteran beginning in 1980s with Corporate Wings, an aircraft charter operation. Today, Ken is the principal of Directional Aviation Capital, which owns 7 aviation enterprises. He's a graduate of Notre Dame and the Cleveland Marshall School of Law. He's an airline transportation pilot with extensive international experience and was Governor William Clinton's pilot when he ran for president in 1992. Ken was honored as the Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year and received the Harvard Business School Dively Entrepreneurship Award and the youngest recipient of the William Ong Award for extraordinary achievement in the general aviation industry. He's a member of the Board of Trustees for University Hospitals, as well as the University of Notre Dame and the Smithsonian. He's written a book called Management by Trust that I think we'll hear about tonight. He's joined with his wife Pamela and 3 associates, Mike Silvestro, Bob Sullivan, and Joe Salata, sitting here in the front row like good employees, I think. Ken's title is behind me, and it's a real pleasure to welcome back Ken to the University of Notre Dame.
Well, it's nice to be here. I always like coming back onto campus, especially on football weekends. Tonight we're going to talk about ethics and a little bit of how that relates into trust. And the course is called Ethics, Nature or Nurture. And I guess what we're really trying to understand is, are people genuinely, should we think of people as genuinely good people? And over time, their ethics or unethical activities happen because they turn somehow bad? Or do we have to think of them as generally bad people, and we have to give them lots of ethics education so that they become good? So that's the course. And the answer is, it's nature. That's it. I'm done. Thank you all for coming. Actually, I know Notre Dame wants to have some research done. This is an important research university. So what we're going to do is a little experiment. So the first 100 people that got here today, it pays to come early. You've been issued an envelope, 2 envelopes stapled together. So if you have one, you're free to show them to the person next to you. You should open the envelope. You can open the flaps are a little bit stuck, but you can just peel them open. And you should look in each side. You should look inside each envelope. All right. What I want you to do, see, I bet you wish the lecture was over.
I don't know, this sounds like rivalry.
Has everybody had a chance to look inside? All right, here's the instructions. All right. What I want you to do is look inside each envelope so that you know what's in each one. You'll notice that they're stapled together. I want you to, now that you know what's in each envelope, you can pull them apart. Seal up the envelope, seal up both of them, and turn one in, the envelope of your choosing. You now know what's in each envelope. One you get to keep, one you have to return. I'll ask employees to come around, pull them apart, keep one, turn one in, the envelope of your choice. Life always has ethical dilemmas. Thank you. Nobody will remember what I said, but they will remember the envelopes. You got it? Okay. If you're still in an ethical quandary, I'll give you a few more minutes and they'll come around to take the envelopes from you. Okay, so anybody who comes to talk at Notre Dame has to be qualified to talk to be here. So let me tell you why I'm qualified. First of all, I've spoken at Notre Dame before. So therefore, that makes me qualified. And I'll tell you that I spoke here many times, and one of the first times I spoke, I remember being done with the class, and there was this kind of hazed over look of everybody. And I just never really felt I connected. I felt maybe I didn't have a good talk or what it was. So I came back the next semester to speak at the same class. And when I came back, I tried to be more engaged. I tried to do things that were more interesting. I tried to put more color into my PowerPoint. And lo and behold, I thought I really engaged with the students. So after we finished the class, we went out with the professor, and I said, you know, Professor, it takes a little while to know how to do this. That doesn't come naturally. And I think I worked really hard, and I felt that this time, as opposed to last time, I really connected with the students due to all my effort. And he said that, but he said also, I told the students what you talked about was going to be on the final. So they paid a lot more attention. So I hope what I'm going to talk about is on the final. Otherwise, I don't know how I'll capture your attention. The second thing you know about me is I've never had any ethical violations. So I'm free here without having to look over my shoulder. And finally, in 2002, I served on a panel at the university to study how ethics was being taught here. And you might ask, well, why in 2002 was the University of Notre Dame analyzing how their ethics department operated? Well, in 2000, we had the dot-com bomb. And that was when the NASDAQ dropped 78%. And a lot of that was due to fraudulent information. A lot of people were hyping the internet. In fact, there was a company called Internet Capital Corporation. Nobody knew what they were going to do, but everybody wanted to buy stock. Man, if that company had the right name, I need to be in Internet Capital. And there was some associated business frauds that happened at almost the exact same time. WorldCom might be one you heard of. Enron would be another one. And the result of this was that we came out with a legislation. The legislation was called Sarbanes-Oxley, or SAX for short. And Sarbanes-Oxley primarily required that companies attest to the information they get out. The actual CEO, the officer of the corporations, had to attest to it. And so it also required that public companies have a code of ethics. And it was very specific about how you had to train your employees on the ethics policy of the company. So this was a reaction to this unethical, or what was perceived as unethical, and the university was analyzing this in the backdrop of what was going on in the market, and that's why they did it. So you would say, well, with the ethical code and conduct in place now, therefore we're done. All ethical quandaries are now over, we've solved it, we've legislated unethical activity out of existence, right? Nah, not exactly. Because what really happened is if you start to look at the unethical things that happened 2004, 5, I'm going to run out of a PowerPoint here before I get to the end of it. But you start to see all of these are only the ones that we've all are somewhat familiar with. Wells Fargo, of course, was funny in 2013. They're back on the list again this year, from what I understand. And if I've missed some, or if you want to see more of them, you can always go watch American Greed, because they clearly cover a lot of these topics. So clearly, legislating ethics didn't help to change the environment at that time. So what you would say was, well, did these guys just skip class, or why is it they didn't know what ethics? And I couldn't help it. I had to look this up, because then I asked, well, I wonder where these guys went to school and what ethics classes they were taking. So here's what I found out. Jeff Skilling, the Enron guy, he had 2 degrees from Harvard. I think they have an ethics program. Dennis Kozlowski was at Seton Hall, which is a Catholic school. You had Hank Greenberg. He went to the University of Miami. We understand that one. Richard Scrushy and Bernie Madoff, they went to Alabama. Can you believe it? How could this work better for us? So you would say, well, when Notre Dame went to review its ethics program, did it make any difference here? Not exactly, because you're not going to believe this one. Rudy Rudiger, 2011, was indicted on stock fraud. So clearly, however we're doing with ethics, we have some issues. And in fact, what I'll tell you about is on that panel that I was on. It was a panel of about 30 or 40 people, and there were professors, there were a couple of students, and the idea was looking at how ethics was conducted here. And I think at that time, some of the proposals that were brought up was perhaps, as opposed to having ethics classes, what we should have is ethics taught as a part of each class. So if you were in accounting, you'd have a section on ethics. If you were in statistics, you'd have a section on ethics. Those were some of the ideas. Now they told us to think outside the box. We want you to think about every kind of, Notre Dame was like, I want you to think about everything possible that you think could affect that we could have a good ethics program here. And so I believed what they told me, and I thought outside of the box. And so my idea was this. I said, if Notre Dame should stand for something, and if we want to make an ethical stance, we should name our buildings after people that we admire at Notre Dame, and not after benefactors. I said, if we did that, or if we had a hall of fame of people that espoused Notre Dame ideas, if that was what we used, perhaps we would be signaling to students what's important, and it's not only about those that can afford to come back and donate. Well, two things happened from that conversation. One was they still name all the buildings after the benefactors, and two, I've never been asked to be on another panel, so it worked out fine. So, what we're trying to get to the point of is that when we start to talk about the ethical nature of people, finally Psychology Today agreed with me, but what I love about this quote, first of all, I've underlined the part that I think is important. Clearly, research has taught us that people have a certain proclivity to act in a certain way. And that's what that's what Psychology Today's study figured out in 2009. Now, I got a hunch that Dr. Saad probably still wanted to teach some ethics classes, so he put in there that even though it doesn't matter, I think they're important. So he at least said that what you're taking is important. So if there's something else here besides just how we educate on ethics. So he talked about stable personality dispositions. And what I would say to you is this relates to me, this isn't how we create a culture of trust. And there have been studies done that link ethics and trust. And what they found is that when you are in a high trust environment, they encourage people to be ethical. When you're in a group of people that are trusted, you just act in a more ethical manner. And building trust is a part of what's required to maintain good ethics, but vice versa. So trust helps build good ethics, and ethical behavior choices are built by trust. So they play on each other. People act well when they feel trusted. And of course, the ancillary is true. When trust is lost, when people don't feel like they can trust anybody, they tend to act more for themselves because it's intuition. And so when organizations don't hold up ethics, when you find organizations like Enron, if you were to go back and ask people that work there and ask them, what was the trust environment? Did you trust the people next to you? Of course not. That guy was trying to steal my accounts. I lock my door at night. I lock my drawer. And so the concept of how ethical we act and how we trust one another is hugely important. So if I were to draw a graph and you took an environment of trust against ethical violations, you would say that as trust environments decline, ethical violations increase. And let's look at some of how trust has just declined in general. So I pulled a couple of slides. This is public trust. This is trust in government. And you can see going back, this is as far back as Pew would give me the data in terms of when it began. But you can see, we could hardly imagine today that 70% of the poll in this room So how many people here trust our government? Well, come on, a couple of you have to. 1, 2, 3. Oh, a lot of skeptics. 4, 5, 6. I would guess. Oh, wait, 7, 8. So we probably have, in the hands I counted, the people that were brave enough to raise their hand, was 11, 12%. But who could imagine that if you would have asked this question in 1958, that 70% of us would have put up our hands? And so we all know this because intuitively we've all been told you can't trust either of the candidates running for office. You can't trust, you can't trust Trump, and you can't trust Hillary. So we kind of throw this world around, and so we really have taken that out of our vocabulary to some extent. Now, they've also done studies on interpersonal trust. Do I trust the people I work with? Do I trust others around me and so on? And as you could imagine, you trust the people closest to you, but the farther you get removed from knowing them, the less you trust them. And so this makes some sense also in that you have the amount of trust that has declined over years. If you go from 72 to now, you know that even trusting people that we know has declined. And this is the one I know you guys will hate, because you guys are really doing us wrong here. The millennials are, in terms of generations, the millennials have the least amount of trust. So somehow we have taken a culture of trust away. And so therefore, by default, if we go back, what we can expect is an increase in ethical issues. So you might ask the question, what's causing this? Why are trust environments decreasing? Well, there's all kinds of theories as to why it is. The assassinations of Kennedy's, people have a bunch of rules. The Vietnam War, the resignation of President Nixon, just the regularity of hyperpartisanship. I call escalated rhetoric. Everything's a war now. We have the war on drugs, the war on kids, the war on guns. Everything's a war. You have just the fact that in general we're surrounded by threats. Terrorism, identity theft. We hear about it all the time. Just the ones I brought up today, the ethical violations of business that you hear about. And I would tell you just the inundation of information, not necessarily verifiable, not necessarily accurate, but an inundation of cable, internet, real-time, unverifiable kinds of things. This is my favorite clip. You can start it for me? Thanks.
Could the biggest science project ever lead to the end of the world?
An enormous earthquake or a massive volcano eruption or asteroids smashing into the earth. Will that happen?
A massive gas line ruptures. Could it happen in your neighborhood?
How many sex offenders live in your neighborhood?
Are there terrorist cells in your neighborhood?
Marijuana. Could it be in your neighborhood?
So-called dirty bombs spewing toxic gas and radiation.
Is America ready?
Is the U.S. next?
Is America dangerously underprepared?
The flip-flop is the new sneaker, but behind this sandal lurks serious danger.
If you think you're immune, you better think again.
Obama's plan is going to kill you.
Not only lack of sleep that could kill you, it's sleeping too much.
What about the water that comes out of your faucet? Did you know that there could be stuff in there that could harm or even kill your kids?
Are your kids being brainwashed? I'll tell you who's taking cues from the Nazis.
A town in California is insisting that every second grader learns about gay penguins.
Social engineering of America's children.
We'll have global governance run by elites.
We'll have our own little China workforce right here in America.
Doomsday 2000.
Killer bees.
Bird flu.
The terror threat, the superbug,
Global pandemic, illegal aliens,
Gun restriction.
Right-wing terrorism.
Evangelical Christianity.
Gay marriage. Death panels.
The flip-flop.
indoctrination,
militias,
Anarchy, chaos, and cannibalism.
Gosh, we better wake up soon.
or we're gonna wake up dead.
Progressivism is a cancer.
Has gone completely brain dead.
The far left does not want the USA to defeat terrorism.
The Republicans want you to die quickly if you get sick.
The left believes Americans are stupid.
Republicans lie.
You cannot be a liberal and a Christian.
We have a village idiot in this country. It's called fundamentalist Christianity.
Islam is a lie from the pit of hell.
Atheists are parasites.
There is a gay and secular fascism in this country.
The Tea Partiers are misguided. I think they're racist.
Racism in this country is the exclusive province of the left.
Rush Limbaugh, overt racist.
Everybody knows liberals hate guns.
I think they are clinging to their guns and their religion.
Our government is all evil right now.
Barack Obama is the worst president in history.
Do you think the president's anti-Semitic?
I do.
This guy is, I believe, a racist.
In Scott Brown, we have an irresponsible, homophobic, racist, reactionary, ex-new model.
Hollywood liberal is a Learjet limousine liberal that wants to tax everybody, be generous with everybody else's money. You know what our real problem is?
A country full of Joe the Plumbers.
Crazed teabaggers.
Criminal, illegal aliens.
Far-right cranks. Far-left loons.
Right-wing nut jobs. Practicing homosexuals.
The mainstream media, radical imams.
Un-American bastards.
The Harvard elites.
Gun nuts.
Tree huggers.
Yahoos and birthers.
Fabian socialists.
Crazies, let's say. They are what's wrong with America.
All right, let's see how our envelopes worked out. So the exercise was, there was absolutely no instructions. We got 42 envelopes back that came back with the $100 bill in them. Would the 42 people who turned in the $100 bill please stand up? Can we give them all a round of applause? Thank you. I want to tell you that these are the leaders of the future. These are the people that don't have to attend any more ethics classes. These are the people that you could count on in your business. These are the people that we admire and are destined for greatness. One more round of applause. Stand up. I'm so proud of you guys. All right, let me ask one question. You were handed this envelope. Does anybody want to change their vote? Does anybody want to turn in the other envelope? If you do, raise your hand and we'll come around and get it. Let's see, you know the only problem is this is Thursday night and there's probably beer drinking going on. So I think I understand the issue. But let's think about this. We said that in government, interpersonal trust millennials, we had a return of 42%. There were 100 $100 bills in the room. So without any instructions, when people looked at that opportunity, 42% decided it's not my money, I'll turn it in. We're started out at a level significantly higher than what anyone else did. So what you'd ask is, there must be something that happens over time that makes us come down. And so that's what I would tell you. That's where the trust is. Now, I've done this experiment many times, and I will say this. Economically, college students react the most greedily. And I think it has to do a lot. They actually have one of the worst turnouts, but I understand why that is. But when I do this in corporations, I get about an 86% return. So I get about 86% of the people that turn that in. One of the things that's funny about it is when I do it in non-for-profits, they're somewhat less. They're somewhat less ethical. What you would think is that you're in a nonprofit organization, you would say in general, you should get a better turnout from the non-for-profits. But that's really where it is. So, in general, what we know is we start out with a nature where we can be, where there is genuinely good trust, and then somehow it diminishes down to where those other levels are. And so that's the premise. And that's really how I got into creating cultures of trust in the companies that we run and how we try to manage by trust. So what I'll say is that leadership should nurture. So I guess it wasn't only nature. They have to nurture an environment. And when they do that, then ethical activity will tell you. I will tell you, this is the first time no one had the guts to turn one in and change their mind. But you never know. Because normally you can lead people to do that. And so ethical activity follows when you have a lack of trust, then you do tend to get a rise in unethical activity. But I would maintain that when your audience, whether it's the people that you work for you, the people that you're leading in an organization, when they trust you, you become a leader. Your leadership is gained by the fact that the people that work for you have faith in you. Almost, unless you're me, because I'm qualified as a leader because my mom in 1956, in the log of life, put down that Kenneth was a leader. So I got to become a leader by namesake. I didn't have to earn it. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the power of trust. Employees get motivated by it. It helps us to come into ethical activities, and employees become more productive when they're in a comfortable environment. So, like I said, we have, as Professor Murphy said, I wrote a book on management by trust, and I'll give you a few just principles about how we instill trust in our organizations, and then we'll have some questions. But some of the principles. Number one is that when you manage by trust, it's a secret. You can't come into any organization when you're hired by one of our companies or one of the companies that I've lectured to and one of the companies that we've worked with to increase the trust of their environment. It's a secret. It's like if you try to say to people, I'm going to manage you with trust, it almost diminishes the impact of it. It's an action, it's not a methodology. And so I point to the idea that when you hear a salesman that says, this is the best price, trust me, how many think he's telling the truth? No, he's not. So you have to be careful that trust is something you don't ever broadcast the fact that you do it. So the first thing I tell is I tell our management team, if you're to instill the principles of management by trust, then don't leave the book on your desk so people will know that you're doing it. Managers must initiate trust. So, in an organization, to create trust, you can't ask for it. You can't tell the organization, you have to trust me, or you don't trust me. You can't intimidate your way into trust. Managers have to initiate it. Managers have to begin the trust. And as you can see, this isn't easy. It's not easy for a lot of reasons. People today, the trust window is small. The least little thing that they don't like, it's easy to lose trust. We're in a defensive society. I played that clip because culturally, we're actually put into a fearing environment, not a trusting environment. And so when you manage with trust, you have to go out there, you have to put yourself up, and you can't force it. It's not rushed. Trust takes a long time to build. And so when you make a commitment to manage an organization in this manner, it can't be rushed. This one, trust has to be genuine. Inherently, if you're just the biggest skeptic in the room, then ignore the lecture, you can leave now. There's no reason because it's not possible. Now, let's not confuse kind of being a tough guy or being a tough boss or a demanding boss with being one that you can't trust or not being able to instill trust. So I did this at a real estate company. And they had a tremendous morale problem at the company. And the CEO of the company tells me, well, here's the policy. And I don't really tell anybody this. But our policy is 5 years and then I kick them out. Because what I've learned, what I've talked about, what I've seen in employees is after they're here about 5 years, they start to get complacent. They lose all their initiative. And so I want them thrown out of here. So if I have that process, if I have that view, how am I going to manage by trust? No one's ever going to do that. And I would say just the opposite. If that's your policy, you can manage. The people will deal with whatever the policy is. What they can't trust is not knowing what you're thinking. If you were to say, look, we want you at this organization. We want your best 5 years. I don't know what's going to happen after then. They'll trust you. They won't be surprised by the fact that at the end of the 5 years, they were gone. And so you really shouldn't, but it still has to be genuine. So that person had to be willing to put themselves out there and to create trust in that environment. What actually he did and never changed the policy. And he seems happier. I don't know if he's got any better employees, but he seems happier about it. This is something that happens, and I put it under the comment of managers, but it's really not just for managers. It's really if you're thinking about any relationship in your life that you're trying to build trust, you have to have a rational and predictable response. You have to have an equal response in an equal situation. So, if in the morning you show up at your desk and the coffee's cold, and that really ticks you off, and you come unglued every time you get cold coffee, then you have to, if you're going to create any trusting environment, you have to be predictable. And so every cup of cold coffee deserves the same absurd reaction. If you're not doing that, if one cup of cold coffee ticks you off and the next cup of cold coffee is fine, you're not creating an environment because you're unpredictable, you're irrational. And so employees don't know necessarily how to deal with someone that they don't know what's going to happen in a situation. And so that will degrade a trusted environment. Now, you must be willing to expose your mistakes. And this is one of the hardest ones that I find in corporate America because it's so counterintuitive. And have you ever seen the statement, you've probably seen them, I may not always be right, but I'm always the boss. And so this is a lot of times, you find this a lot, those of us who are in the military, you find that this is a chain of command argument. I'm the level above you, so therefore this is my ship. We're going to do it this way. Well, not all of us are fighting in the military, and so I think that you gain trust because what qualifies you to be the boss is you're not always right. No one ever is. And the one thing I'll tell you is that when you're able to admit a mistake, it's the way you begin to trust someone. So, if you know someone's faults, anytime you meet someone and they kind of tell you, if they're willing to admit a fault to you, it actually makes you like them better because you think, man, they were willing to share something that they know that not good about themselves. And my best story is when I was flying with President Clinton, Governor Clinton at the time. So the first time I ever met him was over lunch. And the idea was to talk about the campaign, which that in itself is a story because what we were doing at the time is we were chartering aircraft for concert tours. And you make a lot of money on the concert tours by how long it is. And you have an asset, aircraft are tremendously fixed assets. And so what you want to do is make sure they're going to work a lot during the year. You don't want them to sit idle for 9 months and fly for 3. And concert tours were typically 3, 4, 5 months, and you could put 2 of them back to back, keep the plane busy all year. So the guy calls me up and says, have you ever done a political campaign? And I said, not really, but what's the guy running for? He says, well, he's running for President of the United States. And I said, well, how long is he going to need a plane? Because I'm thinking, I don't want some short-term gig here. He says, well, he needs one for 14 months. And I thought, well, that's interesting. I said, well, who is it? He says, it's the governor of Arkansas. I said, the governor of Arkansas is not going to need a plane for 14 months. This guy has no chance of becoming President of the United States. I was wrong. So the first time, see, aren't you endeared to me now that I admitted a fault? So the first time I met with him was over a lunch. And he sat down. He always ran late. And he sat down and he said, Ken, let's order standing up, and we'll have our food, because I gotta work the room a little bit. So he ordered, I ordered, and then the food came. So we sit down at the table together, and he has, as some of you may have known, he was a burger and fries. And not only fries, but sweet potato fries. And I had my chicken Caesar salad. He looked across from me. First things he ever said to me that I ever met him, he said, you know what? I am way too fat and overweight, and I don't think my heart's in that good shape, but I just love sweet potato fries. Think about how much, think of how disarming that is, and how much all of a sudden you felt in a format, you felt in a position to be able to say something or to be able to trust him in a way you couldn't by just simply admitting that fault that he had. I'm not sure of any of those things, but he would do that to disarm people. That was part of what he was good at. Now, once you start managing by trust, there's no stopping, because if you've always been someone that people can rely on, and if you're trustworthy, you are inviting trust. This is a long-term relationship, and then if you break the trust, if that trust somehow ends, then the ability to manage, the people to direct, the ability to bring those people into your confidence ever again will be lower than if you never started. So you can't say this week is Management by Trust Week, and next week we'll try something else. You really have to be committed lifelong to bring this into how you look at relationships and how you manage. Because, principle 7, there's going to be abuse. What happens is that anytime you start down this path, you are going to have people that will take advantage. And what we do so often is we focus only on the people that take advantage. And if you're not willing to accept that there's going to be abuse, if you can't focus on the people that do a good job, then it'll never work. So you have to go into this thinking that there's going to be people that are going to totally take advantage of my good nature. Now, remember, you have more power because of that, and you care about the leadership and the capabilities that those that embrace what you're doing, not those that don't. And I always remember, I get questioned on this a lot, the trust but verify, because Ronald Reagan brought this. This was Ronald Reagan's favorite thing when he was trying to look at the missile issue of the Russian. They were trying to disarm the missiles in the 80s, nuclear missiles. And he said, we're going to trust the Russians, but we're going to verify. Well, he wasn't trying to, he was right. He wasn't trying to make them work for him or to do something for him. They were adversaries. You don't have to trust your opponent. You don't have to trust the guys at the other company. So trust but verify works towards the opposition. It's not something that works within your company. So you can't say things like, we trust our employees, I think. Okay? You have to have the idea that we're going to accept the abuse that might go along with it. Because ultimately, you can only focus, you have to focus on the people that do a good job and not those that don't, those that embrace the organization. I say this all the time that we have to monitor the pink shirts. And here's what I mean by that. If I stood out the entrance to our company and I had a clipboard, and everybody that walked by me, I either looked at them or I looked at them and put a check mark down. People would start to figure out, well, what's he keeping track of? Well, all of a sudden, if everybody that had the pink shirt, I put a check mark, people would start to say, well, I'm not sure what this pink shirt thing is, but clearly the boss thinks it's important, so you'd have a lot of pink shirts start showing up. So you can't monitor everything. You have to monitor what achieves your goal. And if the goal here is trust, and what I'd say is, I want to ignore the underperformers and focus only on the people that will embrace and perform. So, and a lot of organizations, what they'll do is they'll have some systems of demerits, warning reports, put you on notice, you name it. They all have a term for it. And what this means is that when your performance becomes substandard, you find out somehow that you've dropped below the minimum line of survival. And so that's the pink shirt. If nobody's checking off anything except the time you drop below the ability to perform, then your whole goal will be just to stay above, not getting on the I didn't perform list. If the reverse was true, if every time you did something well, the check marks went off, you could encourage the organization to do more things correctly. And so what we have as a policy within the organizations is we have commendation reports. And throughout all the organizations, we have about 3,000 employees, so a lot of this is done at different levels. But each one of the managers that reports to me reports on a monthly basis how many commendation reports he gave out. So what we monitor is the pink shirts. How many times did you monitor people doing the job well? And so this is the pink shirt. So don't focus on, are there people abusing the system? Are they dropping below the line? Are they not performing? Yeah. But that's not what we focus on. We're not making our focus on those guys. They're always going to be there. And so focus on where we want, on the best of your people, not on the worst. Now, there are actions, I see this all the time, and this is one that's come in all the time. Companies go to this trust but verify program. Computer monitoring is one that it happens in every company about 3 times a year. Someone from the IT department comes in and says, you know what we don't do? We're not making any attempt to monitor when employees are at their computers. Are they working on our stuff or are they working on other stuff? And you know, they have a program now We can actually tell you by keystrokes, our employees, are they playing the basketball pool? Are they checking the Notre Dame line for this weekend? Or are they actually working? And so always, and this is exactly the opposite of what you want to do to build trust. Because if you're going to take the approach that in general, they're all doing well, that you want to focus on the performers, you want your IT department to come back and tell you, you don't want them to act as policemen. You don't want them to give you that information. And there's a number of these. I put down just a few of them. When we have our managers come through, we focus on a lot of them. But we do things like we have no meal allowance within the company. You're hungry, eat. If you can't figure out what the right amount for dinner is, then we really made a mistake in hiring you. We don't monitor telephone usage. We don't monitor. We have no such thing as 6 days. If you're sick, you don't come to work. Have you seen this thing now where some of the companies are offering unlimited vacation days? So there's now a policy out there, Silicon Valley thing, you gotta love them, they always figure this stuff out. So where you have unlimited vacation days, take all you want. You know what they found out? Now nobody goes on vacation because they're all scared to death that somebody else isn't taking vacation. But what we do is we give a personal day, and they count as vacation, they count as sick. You use them at will. We don't try to make any attempt to monitor, or you're not feeling well today, we need a note from your doctor. We're past the first grade. Okay. And lastly, as I come to a close, what I said was always think optimistically about your employees and about the group that you're in. So what I will tell you is we call it the hiring paradox. And what this means is that sometimes the best day you ever work for a company is the day you get hired. You come home and you tell your family, man, what a great interview that was. Those people, that's such a fun company. And I can't wait to get started there. And you're so excited you got the job. And you look at your offer letter and you brag to your friends. And then the next thing you do is you report to work. And the first thing they do is they'll roll out all the rules. And they'll tell you, okay, this is what you don't want. Don't get out of line. You have to get here before the boss gets here. And all of a sudden, all that excitement that you have is exactly undone. So the hiring paradox is that we hire the best and brightest unless they work for us, and then they're not so bright because then we demean and we don't promote, we don't advance, we don't trust. And so what we want is to allow people time to adapt their organization. In general, we just say what we want to create is an environment where we're continuously recruiting our employees. This is another thing that we do. We publish a list of what every employee makes. So we have a compensation. It's internal. We don't show it to our competitors. But every employee's salary is there. And you'd be amazed. So first of all, I'll tell you that even if you think they don't know, they all know whatever each other makes because it just, as long as we have water coolers, they'll be there. So what it forces is it forces a conversation. It allows people who are in the organization that are doing a similar job to know what the range of where they can go is. So they don't have a ridiculous thought, that I'm going to make $1 million a year here, making catering orders. So it allows the employees to become informed. It forces managers to be fair in terms of how they treat all the employees. Because what do you think is the first conversation that happens in any employee review? Well, Michael makes $72,000 a year, and I do a better job than he does, and I only make $62,000 a year. And that's a very valid conversation because the boss has to be able, the manager has to be able to explain why is it that Michael makes $72,000? And if he can't explain why you're making $62 and he's making $72, it's his problem, not yours. You brought up a valid point. And if he's right that you're only making $62, he's owed to tell you that if you did these 4 or 5 more things that Michael did, because Michael's perfect, if you did those things, then you too would make $72,000 a year. So it forces a conversation, but you'll find so often that people are afraid to have a conversation around compensation, which is hugely important in terms of the pink shirt. A lot of the pink shirts we're checking off have to do with a way that we monitor, a way that we grade is through compensation. So we have a very unique annual review process. We have a process whereby on the anniversary of your hire, you're sent a 3-page self-evaluation. And that self-evaluation, we have 3 fundamental principles of the company, And each one of those is a page. And it asks you to go according to the company, the fundamental principles of the company. One might be like fanatical attention to detail. And so you would be asked during your self-evaluation to go through and rate yourself on fanatical attention to detail, and then you have a narrative to talk about or give examples about it. So it forces you to evaluate what you do in the lines of the company's evaluation. Now, we long have known that our employees come in three flavors. They come as those that are committed to the organization, will recommend it to their friends, and will come with a smile on their face to do their job. You met them tonight, the 42 people who turned in the envelopes. The other ones are exiting employees. These are employees who, this is not a long-term home for them. They want to get some experience. They have other sites in mind. They want to test out the business world, and they're going to move on. They too will do a good job because they want their resume to look good. They want a recommendation, and then when they move on, they want to do it. They want to know that they had success where they were. And then we have the group of employees that are trapped. And these employees don't like coming here. They put their resume out, but nobody wants to hire them. They've tried other avenues. Maybe their spouse is in town. They can't get a different job. Their kids, they like the school their kids are in. So they stay there, but they're really not an asset to your organization. When we send out the reviews, you do not get a raise. You do not get reviewed by the company until you turn it in. And it's amazing. What we find is that within any organization, about 30% of the employees of that organization will be trapped. They're not working there for any other reason than they got nowhere else to go. What we find is almost an exact corollary. Those are the people that won't even fill out their own self-evaluation. They won't even begin the review process. And so these are ways of identifying members of the organization, and we use this throughout all of our review process. And I was asked a question earlier, what do you do with the people that are trapped? But they self-select. They self-select out because they know they can't ever go up. They're too lazy or they're too lack of commitment. Let's not say lazy. They're too uncommitted to kind of want to fill out the review. But yet they're out there looking at everybody else's comps going up, and your peer group is watching your comp go nowhere. And so it ultimately even self-selects you and kind of makes you, the organization, it takes a life and forces you, can move them out of the organization. And so that's some of the things we do at Trust. I'll close by telling you that we like to believe that there's something about business. There's something about we're in an ethics class. We're in the Mendoza School. We've thought about business as our career. You wouldn't be here. Something of business appeals to you. But what I'll say many times is that business is not a really, it's a tough gift. It's a really tough gift because the business of making money in many ways flies in the face of what the spirit of Notre Dame might be. We have we instill a lot of giving. We instill a lot of environment here to do that. And so I find that when you can instill trust in an organization, when you can change a culture, you're finding a good side. You're bringing more to that business than just about making the money. It appeals to the better side of our human nature, and I like to close by saying it reconciles values that we embrace in life with values that we have as managers. And so I'll thank you for, I'll close with Ernest Hemingway, who said the best way to trust somebody, to find out if you can trust them, is to trust them. Thank you.
We have time for some questions. Who'll be first?
Here? Yeah.
I guess I was just blown away with your announcement that you publish the compensation for all your employees.
Yes.
This is more situational. Let's say you put in someone new to the organization, and most likely that someone you will offer him or her what you think is the potential, or also because of the bargaining with that person. Most likely that person will come in, if it's a premium of, I say, 10% from what he or she currently makes. Now, how does that affect the current employees if they're taking the same position, but they maybe are paid higher than this current employees?
So three things. Number one is, it's not the employees, it attacks the manager, right? It forces the manager to be fair. Because if I didn't publish, that action would be less likely to go on because I published the salary. If I don't publish them, the manager can sneak them by. Well, you know what? I really want this guy, so I'm going to give an extra 20 grand because no one's going to find out about it. So and that would create distrust in the organization, right? Because there's kind of secret deals going on. So part of being transparent organization means I can't allow that to happen. So the manager has to take responsibility for that or defend the action of doing that. Now, we have one other thing, is that, the other thing is that when we offer someone a job, do you know how we set their salary? We ask them to name it. Our employees, now we have standardized positions, like, we have people that come in and do reservations or do flight planning or do catering and so on, and those positions have a range, and there's a generally published when we ask for those jobs, there's a published standard salary. But when we're talking about bringing people in at a certain level, like a head of IT, or we're bringing in bringing a person in, in accounting, a high-level accounting position, we let them name that salary. And that is more important than you think, because first of all, in general, people name a salary below what you think you were going to pay them. And that's not the point. The point isn't to get a deal. The point is, you want them, remember I said the hiring paradox. I want you to be so excited that you're coming here to work. And so if you wanted to make $105,000, but the offer was $95,000, for 10 grand, I didn't get all of your enthusiasm. So why don't you just tell me you want to make $105,000, I'll pay you $107,000, and you'll hit the ground running. Now, 6 months later, you'll either be the greatest employee we ever had and it won't bother us that we paid you extra money, or you'll be the worst guy and we need to force you out. See, what I think is we become lazy. The third thing I'm going to say is we become lazy as an organization. Organizations take on a sedentary nature. And so by publishing those salaries, it puts a kick into the organization. It doesn't allow us to become sedentary because everybody is looking at that all the time. And they want to know where they stand, or at least when they see their review, they look at their peer group all the time. So it helps the organization not become sedentary.
I think everything you had to say was awesome. I totally agree with all of those principles and running a business.
Did you turn in the $100?
I did.
Good, all right.
But my question is, how does that scale? Because I could see that being very effective in a smaller organization, but once you get into these, 500,000, 10,000, 100,000 employees, I mean, sure, culture can persist, but there's way more margin for error.
So it happens in two ways. Number one is no organization of 500,000 people runs by one guy. So if I'm the only trusting person in the organization, it's not going to work. I have to bring in people that will espouse that principle and can carry it on and can teach it on. And when you join an organization that already has this culture in it, you're kind of predisposed to join in. If that's not what you want to do, you're probably not going to join that organization. So that's number one. So the second thing is you have to cultivate trust also. So there's certain things that we talk about how we cultivate. So do you know? So I was a peripheral supporter of Notre Dame in the middle 80s. So 10, 12 years out of school, I'm a peripheral supporter of Notre Dame, but kind of went to the Cleveland Club event. And then in 1992, my father dies. I'm a peripheral supporter. I'm not important to the university in any way, shape, or form. They sent someone to the funeral and actually my father was a musician, and actually sent a trumpet player to play the alma mater at my dad. Do you think I'm ingratiated to this university? Do you think we created a bond? Of course we did. So what we do in the organization is relatively simple things. I can't go to every funeral within the organization, but we can be represented. We can recognize an important birth. We can recognize an important death in your family. We can know when your mother has cancer. So what we do is we instill in the managers that method. And this is not this. You don't need an MBA to do this. Okay. These are things that are there. I'll give you another one. we have an adoption benefit, $10,000 for anybody you want to adopt. If you just tell us you're adopting a kid, we send you a check for 10 grand. You don't think if you help somebody adopt and build their family, you haven't created a long-term relationship, a long-term environment of trust. So in the large organizations, it's like anything. You have to go down to the blocking and tackling. I can't teach this at a large level to 500,000 people, but I can teach it to the management team. But even someone that doesn't even want to get into it all, I can tell them, let me give you 5 things I think you need to do. Other than praise all your employees, I want to see more accommodations. Bob, where are we at now? 4 to 1? 3 to 1. So in any department head, we want that department head, we need to see 3 times as many commendations as there are warnings. So if you've got somebody bad in your, if you got 150 employees and last year you had 10 warning reports, people that were on the verge of underperformance, we expect to see 30 people that you praise. We want to make sure you as a manager aren't just running around beating everybody with a stick. So you have to take it down more basic. But really, the blocking and tackling is putting forth trust first. I think it's principle 2. You have to go out there and say, look, I want to have a deeper relationship with you, and I'm going to acknowledge when you've had struggles in your life, and I'm going to be there. Yes?
Did you ever actually ask the group to return the $100?
Never. Because the exercise was intuitively, I asked you after you gave it, I said, anybody want to change their mind? But intuitively, what I was just trying to show was the fact that nobody knew what to do. Somebody could have said, hey, it was a gift. I'm glad I didn't cut class tonight. But the idea was, even in that backdrop, with 0 instruction, if I had given you any instruction, I could have changed the results dramatically. But the instruction was just intuitively, what do you want to do? You looked at 2 envelopes. I don't know what this is for. I'm either entitled to it, it's a gift, or I don't know, it's not mine. So no, I purposely don't give instructions, although I sometimes get challenged on it. Yeah?
When you do have to terminate employees, how do you keep the trust up with the existing employees?
So there's a couple of things. Number 1 is we never announce a termination. So we try to make sure that in anything like that, there's dignity involved. So if somebody wants to say that they're moving on to another job, they can move on. We let them define for the most part. Now, we had a little problem that, like I said, you're going to have to accept abuse. And even our trusting group of managers got to a point where the abuse was too much. And we took one time and made an example of it. But normally what we would do is we would keep the termination quiet. And when you have an environment where people trust you, they tend to come and say, well, look, what I know is they've never acted irrationally before, so I've got some sense that it wasn't going that way. But you'll also find this. They know it before you do. The employees know more about who's not there and who's not pulling their load than you do.
Last question.
Yes?
Just very curious to know that this strategy is really working for your employees and for you as a company, and what's your attrition rate like?
So, Bob, you know that, attrition rate is minimal.
We run attrition for voluntary termination or voluntary people that leave the organization. Typically in our industry, it runs in the 20%. We run at less than 7%.
But I think that, no, I haven't done talking. There may not be time for a last one. The more important thing is I talked about as we look at our employees, and we poll them. You get a blind polling agency, and you ask people to respond to a very short survey, and to find out if they're an exiting, a trapped, or a committed employee. And in most organizations, the benchmark is around 30% of your employee work group is committed. And as hard as we work, we've driven it into the low 40s. So this isn't a panacea. I think you have to admit that you're never going to have an organization where 100% of your employees are so happy to be there, and this organization universe. What you can do is move the bar 10%. You can move it to 41% that like to be there, and that's pretty darn good.
All right. Ken, thank you very much.
Thank you.